Hey everyone, welcome back to Mike Fish. In this video, I am going to go through some of the worst mistakes beginners make when entering the fish hobby. I have heard each and every one of these mistakes multiple times throughout my life, on forums, in local fish shops, or from my acquaintances. Of course, we were all newbies at something at some point, and I certainly was 25 years ago when I first entered the aquarium hobby. Some of these may seem a little vague, but I am going to try to get through them as fast as I can. At number 15, I would say not quarantining your fish. Though this can be detrimental to an already established tank, most newbies are starting from scratch with an entire new system. Therefore, the tank in itself is a quarantine. However, if you have a tank full of expensive fish and you decide to throw in a newly purchased fish, something like ick can easily be introduced into the system. And the next thing you know, you are treating the entire tank for it. In a more severe case, internal parasites can be introduced, and that is not fun to deal with at all. So quarantine your fish for 4 to 6 weeks. Number 14, not enough surface agitation. I see way too many videos online with fish gasping at the surface for air because they are sitting in stagnant water. Of course, plants help with oxygenating the water. However, put an air stone in the aquarium, or keep the filter outlet above the surface. Once again, heavily planted tanks are a different story. Number 13, not researching a fish before purchasing it or buying on impulse. I am pretty sure most of the Oscars and Bala sharks sold at PetSmart are sold to people that don't know that these fish get huge. They see these cute little 1-inch fish for $7 and mix it in with peaceful community fish in a 5 or 10 gallon aquarium. Some other points that might get overlooked are dietary requirements, aggressiveness, or even substrate and lighting. Reading up on a fish for 5 minutes can really go a long way. Number 12, overfeeding. A lot of newbies overfeed their fish, and I can tell from the big bellies on them or excess food on the bottom of the aquarium. Excess food can deteriorate the water quality quickly. All fish are different, but for a general community tank, I put in enough food that can be fully consumed in 1 to 2 minutes once a day, or split it up with 2 feedings a day. I have personally witnessed parents letting their kids just throw in a huge pinch of food for a single betta in a 5-gallon tank. Another reason overfeeding occurs is just because of boredom or to watch the fish move around. I have been around a lot of kids, and they always want to feed the fish, always. Number 11, not doing water changes. The amount of people that don't follow up with routine aquarium maintenance after spending all that money on fish astonishes me. Not to mention the health and life of a living organism. I do weekly water changes of 25% on all my tanks, and always have. I find that it is the perfect balance with the amount of fish I have in my tanks and the amount of food I give them. There are exceptions for aquariums with a small bioload in a heavily planted tank. The best thing you can do is get a water testing kit and to test your water. A general rule of thumb is to do a 25% water change every 2 to 3 weeks. Number 10, adding all your fish at once. I personally like to stock my aquariums a few fish at a time. You just never know, anything can happen, and the last thing I want is to lose 30 fish instead of 5. Adding a lot of fish to a new system could also cause an ammonia spike, and it can be detrimental if the tank isn't cycled. Again, there are exceptions, but this is a general rule I like to follow. Number 9, not acclimating the new fish. If there is one thing pet shops do well, it's that they tell customers to float their fish in the bag in the aquarium for 20 minutes. Of course, there are people that don't follow those directions and just throw them in, causing a temperature shock to the fish. I float fish for 30 minutes and slowly add my aquarium water to the water that the fish are in. I also never put the bag water into my aquarium. I always use a net to transfer the fish into their new aquarium. Number 8, contaminants and proper cleaning of equipment. I always like to run a brand new system for a week or 2 and change the water a couple times before adding fish. It's just a precaution, and you can call me paranoid if you want. There are also many cleaners, chemicals, sponges that you do not want to use in a fish tank. My go-to is vinegar when cleaning my tanks. Of course, there are exceptions, and I will leave that to you to research further. Just be careful. Number 7, keeping a single specimen of a schooling species. Though this is not fatal to fish and they can live a long life in solitaire, it simply drives me bonkers when I see it. The difference you see in the fish when they are in a group are night and day. Some single specimens really get stressed out. They aren't active or usually hiding. Of course, exceptions, but it is just my preference to keep certain fish in groups of their own species. This comes from seeing countless videos on TikTok of a 5-gallon fish tank with one neon tetra, one corridora, one black skirt tetra, one clown loach all mixed in. You get the point. Some fish like my flowerhorn need to be alone because it will attack anything I put in the tank. Number 6. Overstocking a fish tank. Overstocking a tank has its place in the hobby, for instance with certain cichlids. But for the most part, when newcomers to the hobby do it, it is by accident or lack of knowledge. Overstocking a fish tank is simply putting too many fish in an aquarium, and the filter cannot handle the bioload. It could also mean putting too large of a fish in a small tank. Either way, know what your system can handle by testing your water and do routine water changes. If you have a 5-gallon fish tank, you probably shouldn't put 10 fish in it. Number 5. Not cycling a tank. This is setting up an aquarium and not allowing the filter the chance to form beneficial bacteria. The beneficial bacteria converts the ammonia the fish release into nitrite, and then into the less harmful form, nitrate. You can cycle a tank simply by buying a bottle of beneficial bacteria, taking filter media from an already running filter and aquarium, or by starting off with one fish in the aquarium to get things started. Number 4. Improper tank mates. I have seen numerous people mixing species of fish that don't belong together. Of course, there are exceptions that might work. However, research your fish and see what are good compatible tank mates. I recently saw an Oscar torn to shreds and barely surviving, with the owner baffled at what could have caused this. It was placed in an established tank of African cichlids. A good rule of thumb to also follow: if a fish can fit inside another's mouth, chances are it's going to be dinner. Of course, I know there are exceptions. I have even seen flowerhorns in a tank with other fish. Meanwhile, mine attacks everything that goes in the tank, including my decorations, net, and even my hand. I had an Oscar that was the same way, and I even raised it with fish since it was a juvenile. Number 3. Tanks too small for the fish. The amount of videos online with fish in a tank that it has no business being in disgusts me. This includes people with arowanas, goldfish, common plecos, stingrays, bala sharks, Oscars, and many more. These fish get over a foot long, some of them much larger, and yet people keep them in small tanks. They buy these cute $7 baby Oscars from PetSmart without doing their research, and keep it in a 10 to 20 gallon its entire life. In my opinion, I wouldn't keep any arowana in a tank smaller than 300 gallons, and yet some people keep them in tanks where they cannot even turn around. Number 2. Plecos are tank cleaners and will keep your tank clean. To elaborate on this, there are people out there believing that plecos thrive on eating fish poop and algae. This is ridiculous, and I even heard a staff member at a pet shop saying that exact thing. People also add plecos to a new tank where there isn't any algae to begin with, so they have no food or algae. I have seen and heard time and time again plecos dying, and they always seem to have starved to death. Most newbies purchase the common pleco for cheap, which get huge, expecting it to keep their tank clean. Meanwhile, they are poop machines. Plecos also thrive in high oxygen, high flow waters, and I see it often where they are put in a 5 or 10 gallon tank with just a tiny filter, with no surface agitation. Feed your plecos, they eat just as much as other fish, if not more. Depends on the species: cucumber, zucchini, sinking pellets, frozen shrimp, algae wafers all work well. Remember, variety is important. At last, number 1, YouTubers and TikTokers abusing fish for views. This is the worst trend to go around, and I am sure we have all seen it. It could be keeping a betta in a little cup, unnecessary live feedings, letting fish fight or gang up on something, putting 30 fish in a vase, and then following it with a clickbait title and a bunch of false information. Social media can be one of the best things for the fish hobby or any hobby. However, it is also the worst. Facebook groups, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram all have their share of bad apples, promoting garbage simply for a view. I am even involved in Facebook groups in which their moderators chime in on topics with false information. I think if you don't know something, please don't pass it on as fact. I see it from newbies all the time on social media. People are so toxic in these groups, and when I call them out on something, their defense is usually, "Oh, I've only been in the hobby for a few months, I didn't know." People also falsely identify fish, diseases, or reason why a fish died, simply from one low-quality photo. I get some fish look very similar to one another, but when people or even moderators falsely identify a fish, it is worse than nobody answering the question someone may have. Don't tell me a petricola is a multipunctatus. Don't tell me a tiger pleco is a bristlenose. Don't tell me a guppy is a tetra. That concludes my rant video about some of the mistakes I see from newcomers in the hobby. I am not blaming individuals for these mistakes, especially if they have tried to research or been told false information. I am 25 years into the hobby, and I am still learning things. The most important part is that people are open to learning and fixing these mistakes to ensure their pet fish have a long and fulfilling life. I feel like I have to really emphasize this, but there are some exceptions to some of the things I have listed. However, chances are, newbies do not know those exceptions. Which of these mistakes do you personally think is the worst? Please answer in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.